planning to be there in Charleston in person with you, but circumstances intervened. So I'm so sorry I can't join you, but in person. But wonderful to be here this morning, and big welcome. Thank you for coming to our session on bridging to the big collection, putting collective collection into practice for the Big Ten. We've been talking about the big collection. We've been in a state of visioning, of conceptualizing for about 2 or 3 years now. So you may have heard different portions, had a little window into different aspects as you're doing all of that work. Just this winter, probably happened about January or February, we're about to transition from that conceptualizing phase into the building phase. And over that course of that 3 years, we've really started to get a little bit of an insight into what it will look like as we start that phase of building and sort of put our feet on the ground. So that's what we're going to tell you about this morning. And I'll show you a little bit just of our agenda here. I'm going to give you a little bit of context on the Big Ten Academic Alliance. I'm going to then hand over to my colleagues in the room there to talk about the big collection vision, and then importantly vision in practice. And this is where we're going to talk about several of our key pilots that we're doing, and this is where we really start into that action phase and into the building phase. And then we're going to have some discussion. So where I want to start is just with context then, and sort of to create our frame for the morning. We'll start just with who we are. Big Ten Academic Alliance. Here's the logo board. Here's who we are. Many of us are public institutions. A number of them are land grants, and we do have 2 private institutions as well, Northwestern and the University of Chicago. This shows us all separately. If we take a little bit of a different look at the map, this is what we look like as the Big Ten as a network. BTAA has been around for about 60 years. It's really about thinking holistically on behalf of the whole, about joining our strengths together and creating something that's more powerful than the sum of our parts. Really looking at the needs of the whole and then engaging intentional and strategic coordination to achieve the work in the collective interest and for the greater good. This really is the power of collaboration. It's the power that stands behind the big collection. Just to give you a little bit of a timeline then, I mentioned we've been here for about 60 years and driving the collaboration. You may have formerly known us as the Committee on Institutional Cooperation. A less inspiring name, we are now the Big Ten Academic Alliance. The CIC was founded back in 1958. In 1964, just a few years after we were founded, there's this report. It's an actual report. It's a typescript. It's on my desk. Some observations on the possibilities of instituting cooperative automated systems among CIC libraries. At that time, our shared collection was 18 million volumes. This is really, I kind of point to as the origin of these first ideas about what could we do as a collective? What if we joined our collections together? What would that look like? We went forward over several decades, kept returning to this idea. In the 90s, it manifested as a project called the Virtual Electronic Library, a renewed effort at joining together the catalogs of all of the Big Ten libraries. At that time, the shared collection was at 58 million volumes. That didn't quite work in the 90s, as it didn't quite work in the 60s. We were still getting our feet under us. The technologies weren't quite there. Then in the 2010s, in 13, 15, 16, and 17, we had a number of reports on discovery to fulfillment systems. You'll hear Emily talk a little bit more about UBAO. That is our borrowing backbone, our borrowing platform. That went into place somewhere around 2012. And then we had the series of reports that were coming out to try to vision the next generation of resource delivery. So continuing to work on this ideal. The big collection visioning itself began in 2019. At that time, the shared collection was 114 million volumes. And this is when we really started bringing this idea is how do we turn this ideal that we've been carrying for 50, 60 years into action. So in 2019, 20, 21, and here we are in 22, we really started to this commitment to creating the big collection. There was a report in 2019 that you may be familiar with, operationalizing the big collection, which is a report we did in conjunction with partnership with OCLC, a commitment to an interdependent future. This was a one-page piece of paper. Every one of our 15 library directors signed it, which really launched the big collection. And then we formed a steering committee in 2020, and in 2021, our first pilots launched. And you're going to hear a good bit about those pilots later in the presentation. Here's what that big collection was, right? So I talked about this library director's commitment to an interdependent future towards joining together, moving the 15 independent collections of the Big Ten to be one collection, shared and fully networked. This is a massive vision. It's a massive impulse. And standing right behind that was, this needs to be a real thing. It needs to be tangible. It needs to deliver real benefits to our faculty, to our students. So implement the system, services, and policies necessary to create that fully networked collection, and always keep it at the forefront in order to serve our students and scholars, support the common mission, and then this wonderful balance between maximizing access and ensuring preservation of the scholarly records, or our core mission. So what is the scope of the big collection? What are its dimensions? It's just simply massive. And this was a sketch I did trying to visualize this sort of as continents, if you will. Right? All the different aspects of this: the purchase collection, the license collection, data sets, right? Geospatial, government, commercial, other kinds of data, the digitized collection, the published collection, and then this wonderful continent of open access. We could call it open scholarship. We have all kinds of wonderful, rich discussions about whether that's even its own continent or it's actually part of the others. And the big collection wanted to say, the big collection already exists. It has existed for something like 200 years. And our position now is to say, where we stand today, move forward with it. In a certain sense, to join all of these continents together and to have a common collection, but the purpose of that is to be able to redirect and deepen investment at the institutions in distinctive collections in those things that serve the institutional mission uniquely. So it almost visualized this shared collection in the middle, sort of these wonderful, beautiful islands, or icebergs, if you will, an archipelago perhaps, of distinctive collections that form around the big collection. This leads us to the idea that the big collection is not really a collection of things. It is about the things we collect, certainly and purchase. It's also about services. It's about people. At a very high level, it's about the knowledge commons. And this is where we came to the insights that what we're actually building together is a knowledge commons for the Big Ten. Creating knowledge infrastructure on behalf of the public interest, working for sustainable creation and preservation of scholarly and scientific knowledge, and especially working for open access. We are cognizant, of course, that there are many, many threats, that come in and join into threaten our ability to move forward with creating coherent knowledge commons. And we have to keep our eye on those. And we can rightly say, as students, as scholars, as people of the public are looking at the knowledge commons, they would rightly ask questions like, what gets saved? Right? Who decides? And why? And on what terms? And who gets to see what? So there are very high ideals that guide what the knowledge commons is and what we're trying to create. It will be, in the first place, findable and usable, providing access to the total pool of knowledge. It will be open and just, public knowledge for the public good. These are the highest ideals we will always in view. Durable and trustworthy from past generations to future scholars. And inclusive and collaborative, vested in the community. Let's return to those risks, right? There are risks of instability all around us. There are many risks. Cost is one of those, of course. We're living in an era of rapid inflation, of rising costs on every side, but it's not the only risk we face. Of course, there's also climate crisis, right? That's a real threat. Public health crisis, what we've been living through collectively for the last several years. Social unrest, political upheaval, infrastructure collapse, all of these create this like giant fire of risk at the center. And we have to ask ourselves, in the presence of all those risks, which can be paralyzing, right? They're quite destabilizing. But what's the risk of inaction? What's the risk of doing nothing in the face of all of those risks? And we can see that the risk of doing nothing for us is much higher than the risk of tackling those monumental and very complex challenges. An imbalance in between academy-owned and commercial infrastructure, siloed behavior in a networked, interdependent world, increasing waste and redundancy, and just an inability to serve as effective stewards of the scholarly and cultural record. Really, all that's at risk is our fundamental mission, right? It's why we're here. So the way we approach this is by working in collective action. Here's the collaboration continuum, as we will. We have moved through all phases of this over our 60 years together, from individual action through cooperation, coordination, collaboration, into collective action. And where we are now is pushing everything we have into collective action. It is the lead idea and the purpose. It is our pathway to build resilience against an uncertain future. That collective action doesn't mean we expect each other to behave the same, but that we bring our respective strengths. What are they? What do we each bring to the table? What can we each be counted on for? And what can we each count on each other for? So I'm going to hand off now to my colleagues in the room there. But as we do this, we always rest in the first principles of libraries. These are things that have guided us for thousands of years now. I always like to go a little broad, right? Let's say hundreds of years, even thousands, to be community investment in a shared resource, provide egalitarian access to the tools of knowledge creation, be a provider of domain expertise to empower researchers, and be the facilitator of interdisciplinary and cross-institutional collaboration while we are acting as a long-term guardian and preserver of the research products of the institution. So Kate, I'll hand this over to you in part two. This is going into a little deeper into the vision for the data collection.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me all right? All right, great. I'm Kate McCready. I'm the Visiting Program Officer to the Big Ten for Academy-owned scholarly publishing, and I'll be talking about that a little bit later in the session. So, as Morris described, the big collection is really about uniting the collections of the Big Ten research universities and libraries. And that is just a massive undertaking. So I'm going to try and break it down a little into where we're at and how we're going about doing our work. Got to make sure Morris and I are in sync here. The big collection, if you can imagine this brimming pool of print and digital collections from these 15 member university libraries, and imagine that we have a very seamless access between our institutions, that we are sharing our resources, that we are collectively licensing resources, that we are creating open content to make it seamless access between our collections is really what we're working toward. The goals, see if I can get on there we are. The big collections goals, we have 4 of them. One is to jointly steward our collection, so doing that licensing together, working on shared print together, things of that nature. Also transforming our systems and policies and practices to be centered in equity and inclusion, really making that the focus of who we are and what our identity is. We want to advance open scholarship and make sure that we're investing in open open infrastructure, that we're considering how content creation happens and how that is the upstream part of the content that we're licensing. And we also want to make sure that we're doing this in a very scalable, collaborative way, that we're looking at our peer network and strengthening that and building that. So those are the goals that we're working on. And it's really to go about creating this ideal, as Morris pointed out in those principles of libraries. Our lead purpose that all the directors have signed on to is to advance a just, trustworthy, scalable, and sustainable open knowledge ecosystem. That is really what's driving all of us behind this work. That's our guiding star. So to break this down a little bit, we've set mile markers. We've only set one thus far. We're not sure what mile marker 2 or 3 will be, but mile marker 1 that we're trying to accomplish as we're on this path, on this journey, if you think about being on the road and seeing an exit ramp that you want to be able to make it to, mile marker 1 is that we're going to make sure that any content is from anywhere is available to anyone now and in the future, and that's within the context of the Big Ten. And so what we're building to get to that mile marker is implementing the infrastructure, the services, the standards, and the agreements needed to build systems of trust. That's the language we're using. Systems of trust for our print collections, for our open publishing, and for our digital collections. And the way that these will be interconnected is really where that peer network is going to have to be working and operating. How we'll work is through collective action in strengthening that peer network, and then who will be, is, as I mentioned, centered in equity and inclusivity. We are starting small with pilot projects so that we can see what works and spin off things that aren't working, and then really make bigger investments into areas that are working. On the next slide, you'll see that we start with pilots. We give them seed resources, and we're going to talk about a couple of the pilots that we're working on. We make small investments, and then we build onto those and invest more of our resources into them to try out bigger projects, scaling it up a bit until we really make it into a programmatic part of who we are and sustain those resources. So when we think about shared print or licensing or open publishing, how we're making those investments. So I'm going to turn it over now into the part 3 of our presentation of the in practice, and I think Emily is going to kick it off. This might be a little clunky as I move this over.
Hi, sorry. I'm Emily Campbell, Director of Document Delivery at the University of Michigan and a member of the BTAA Steering Committee on the Big Collective Collection. So the Big Ten is a significant steward of the print collection in North America. You know, when Lorgan and his team did the report for us from OCLC in collaboration with us, at the time we held 22% of all print books in North America, and more than half are held only by a single BTAA library. So there's a lot less duplication than one was presumed initially, right? We're always like, oh, we're buying it, but so is Nebraska or Wisconsin, and they're not. You know, we do have some uniqueness, and only 6% were duplicated in 10 or more BTAA libraries, which is also significant. So how do we preserve that? Like, I think that one of the questions is, and how do we share it? So that's what comes to me, right? One of the fortunate things in my work is that the BTA ILL coordinators are an incredibly organized and functional group of people who have been working for a long time towards this vision. So we've managed to do returnables in an incredible way. I mean, we're really fast, we're thoughtful, and you know, at Michigan we probably get 85% of our returnables from UBarrow with the Big Ten. So in 2017 though, you know, almost 80% of our expenditure were for licensed, not purchased content, which creates other barriers. So we have other things like that we are struggling with, as everybody else is, streaming media, data sets, all those things we're buying that are expensive, but we cannot interlibrary loan necessarily. So, as I said, we want to move beyond returnables. And the first, so just to give a little background, when you saw on Morris's timeline, there is the discovery to delivery report that a group of us wrote. I wasn't in this role yet. like 10 years ago, 11 years ago, that has been kind of one of our guiding stars. And then since then, we do the U-Borrow program evaluation for the Big Ten, and every time we're like, we've got to move beyond returnables, we've got to do this, we've got to keep moving. So, and discovery is a big, huge piece of this. Like, if you can't find it, you can't borrow it, right? So the first pilot we did was to vision U-Borrow, okay, re-envision U-Borrow. What do we really, really want from it? And we came up with 4 recommendations. This took us like a while. I mean, we've done the work, but we really sat down, we looked at every type of material, and we thought about what we needed, and we came up with 4 recommendations. It was hard to scope because we really wanted to change everything. But these 4 recommendations go from what we thought we could do at 1 and number 4, which is our pie in the sky, as we call it. So investigate a refresh for the U-Borrow platform. We are currently on D2D, which has been purchased by OCLC, and it's just, we need more. And the resources have changed, the landscape has changed. So we just finished a recent pilot. It is in the approval phase, so I can't really talk about it, but it is, we've looked at the current platforms available and recommended one. The next one, which I'm starting in the next month or so, is to harmonize resource sharing policies across the BTAA. And this is really like an environmental scan of where our policies and where things are, what barriers we have to resource sharing. For example, CDs. We don't share CDs in our consortium. Why not? At this point, most music is streaming. Our CDs are sitting on shelves and not getting used. Why shouldn't we share them between our trusted partners? And I think that word trust is really, really important here. So the next one is to investigate the creation and use of a data lake. So discovery is really important to ILL folks because it, like I said, you can't find it, you can't borrow it, you can't lend it. So we would love to see this huge pile of all of our crummy metadata or good metadata in a data lake that we can all access and pull from and really look at that way. And so our final one was to prioritize digital access to all collections. And that's a huge one, right? To ensure we have equivalent rights and systems to lend e-resources, including traditionally non-lendable formats such as streaming media, which I've mentioned before. And as well as the digital surrogates of our print collections. At Michigan, we have a significant digitization program that we have turned into HathiTrust along with everybody else. And, how do we lend those effectively? And I hate to use CDL as an example of controlled digital lending because that's kind of a hot word at my institution, but like how do we create a system where we can provide these surrogates to people, especially in light of things like the pandemic and these times where we can't access our print collections. And also, our print collections we're running out of room. Everyone is, right? How do we create these surrogates and share them and create a facsimile? And so, in my dream world, we have access to all these digital things and we can share them. So those are the main recommendations we came up with. And the next step will be for Lee to talk about. Sorry.
Sure, if you will.
I'm sorry.
No. Hi, my name is Lee Conrad. Can you hear me okay? And I'm the AO for Digital Strategy at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So we're syncing up here. Let's see, you can go to you can stay there. But anyway, as we've been talking, our record of collaboration is very deep and it's built on networks of trust that are very historical in nature, and that trust is foundational and indispensable to achieving this vision. And in turn, I think why this is so important here is that it demands a digital and a technology strategy that's also rooted in those same systems of trust. And so we'll be talking a little bit more about that, but those things that we can all count upon to inform local and consortial decision making around the things that we implement. Particularly, I'll be talking mostly at the systems level. But we suggest that there are 3 main approaches to coordinating technical operations and other kinds of services across such a complex environment. The first is to implement the same ILS at every institution, and for a lot of reasons that's simply not going to happen anytime soon. There's a lot of historical reasons for that. The second is to run middleware systems, things that glue together disparate kinds of systems and services and functions that make it possible to leverage things in the middle that work on behalf of everybody. And then the other is to rely exclusively on vendor systems that are in place right now, but they're inadequate to doing what we're really looking to achieve. And so those things will be evolving as well. And so what I'll be talking about is more of a conceptual system of design in just a second. So for the moment, now I'm going to jump ahead to talking about something called RECAP. And Morris, you can, advance. So in a little bit, we'll be showing the systems of trust conceptual diagram, but one of the key pieces there is one of the pilots that we're engaged with is called the SCSI-B recap pilot, and I'll be referencing those two things a lot. So recap is the consortium. It's a shared print consortium of institutions, Columbia, Harvard, Princeton, and New York Public, and they've got a piece of middleware that they use called SCSI-B, which connects their discovery and inventory management systems at their partner libraries to do a variety of functions. But in a sense, they have a central index of shared holdings of the things that they jointly own and make available, and they have the option of either searching that index as a target or taking the records that are in that index and integrating them into local discovery systems, which is pretty much how we're thinking about it being used in either context in the BTAA. It has a lot of attractive features there, and those things would obviously then tie in with other systems that we're talking about. SCSI-B, in addition to doing the shared inventory management and discovery pieces, also controls or is a repository, if you will, of their print retention commitments. And some of us are in a system that is moving in that direction, others are not. So again, we need that shared space where we can know about those kinds of things and act on them at the computational level. So some of the things that drew us to SCSI-B are just the size and scale of the recap consortium, but it is still much smaller than ours. So we started a pilot a few months back to begin assessing a variety of features of the software, working with people from a variety of library domains and institutions, including CRL and recap itself, and looking at its potential applicability in our context. And so we really hope, can it scale to ours? Which functions does it perform? Where are there gaps of other things that we might need to build out from there and so forth? And we've done a lot of analysis, and we see a lot of potential in the SCSI-B software as a potential tool in our environment, and we're currently in conversation with the software vendor that develops SCSI-B for recap, with our intention being to set up an instance so as to kick the tires, if you will, to load a small amount of data into the system, test integration points, test assumptions as to how the software is actually working, and do more gap analysis before deciding if it moves, as Kate said, from pilot into a scalable programmatic kind of tool. So that's where we are right now, and I'll jump ahead. So if you want to go ahead. Okay. So this one we're going to try and sync up because Morris is controlling the slides, but we're going to sort of walk through our systems of trust diagram, and we'll make this a very quick thing. It's a conceptual map, not an implementation map, so the details aren't so critical as it's how we're communicating with people who may be less technical about the complexities of all of these things and how they fit. So suffice to say, we have many libraries using disparate ILS systems. As I said, we have the UBarrow service, which is our backbone for delivery, and then we have a variety of pilots that are indicated there at any given time in various stages of planning and assessment, so forth. So we're trying to be able to populate the map with the things that are happening at any given time. We know that it's beyond systems, though. Emily just mentioned good data, bad data, and I'm in the camp that says, bad data is not going to be so useful to us. So this vision is really centered on technology meets data meets service, so forth, and that's really where we're trying to go with this. And so we need greater consolidation of metadata management, greater system-wide awareness of how these systems are performing and interacting and so forth. And we are going to be doing formal architectural work as this progresses, but that's where we go. But one of the key things that Emily's mentioned that we're looking at is you see SCSI-B on the right over there? I'm looking here, but pretend we're looking here. So, but SCSI-B is a pilot that's happening over here, but we need to integrate it with a great number of things. And one of the ways we're thinking about this now that emerged out of our SCSI-B conversations is syncing up with the UBarrow visioning about needing a data lake. So we need to have a data lake where we can dump our respective holdings, but more than just holdings, transactional information, other kinds of things that will serve two basic functions. One is to allow us as staff to be able to evaluate what we have, where it is, what its status is at any given time. The other piece being to help create more seamless experience, going back to those discovery to delivery kinds of papers and this overall vision of anything to anyone from anywhere. So we're trying to look at that big data lake as a holding place for all of that kind of information. And from there we can extract, if you want to go ahead, Morris, we can extract different kinds of data sets depending on the need to import it into other systems that might be in place. So in this case, SCSI-B, I mentioned that SCSI-B, the way it exists for recap is they have a repository of a subset of records that they jointly own that has a searchable index. And if you want to go ahead, that the goal would be that in real time a user could discover something. At the point of request, they would know it's available. They might have multiple options to get that item. Like if you can wait this long, it's available this way. If you want it quicker, it's this way. You know, it could play out in a lot of ways, but SCSI-B would be one of those translational hubs that would say, you know, it's not each individual institution talking to one another, but talking to a centralized kind of hub that can serve as that sort of system. It's also important to note, just a couple more things on that, that it's as good as the data itself. So I'd see, your screens are in different places there. Picture if you will. Yeah. No, but that it's more than purely technical. So we have a couple of other ideas on this map. We are anticipating, let's see, what comes up first, Morris? If you go ahead. Okay, so we're talking about having weather maps, if you will, but basically dashboard applications, two main kinds. One being something that can tell users what kinds of requests they've made, where are those requests, at what point, tracking those kinds of things. The other dashboard being much more on the analytics for staff side things of what do we own together, what do we not own together, but what do we need to buy, what, you know, so there's all kinds of collection development applications that could be used, preservation considerations and so forth, that a data lake could also inform. And then the other piece, we have an MOU for shared agreements. All of this hinges on, again, the harmonization of things that Emily has talked about, but it's, you know, it's good data, but it's also good policy and good strategy around those kinds of things. So I think I can leave it at that. Oh, the last thing, we are also anticipating on the map we can include new things as we see them penciling in. They don't have hooks yet, but we're looking at creating an inclusive metadata registry, which would be, again, type of data that we can say, well, this is data that we all agree to use for like harmful subject headings or things like that, where we want to improve the patron experience, but we don't want to be doing that one-off all the time. So again, that could be potentially made available to all interested libraries. It could just be related to the BTAA, but it's that kind of thing. We're trying to do this at a conceptual level to keep larding things in and record what states our various pilots are in. So that's about it for that. And then just last minute, just on some emerging areas of focus, we're also looking heavily at our digital collections and preservation, both the collections themselves and the systems. My colleagues have mentioned, you know, disparate kinds of collections, and we have massive collections in digital form beyond even the considerable work that we've been able to do so far with groups like HathiTrust and others. So it's not that we're not involved there, but we anticipate really growing that because we have a lot of very vulnerable resources. We do have a BTAA digital preservation peer group that's currently in motion, and that's a network of practitioners who are working together to define and improve our methods and understand them for preserving digital materials. And in the coming year, we're looking to expand on those efforts to digitally preserve vital information. Again, identifying and using scalable and sustainable systems that will benefit all of us. So with that, I'll turn it back to Kate.
Okay.
Oh, you want that too?
I've got a big voice. I have 3 boys that I yell at, but maybe not as big as this room. I'm going to just very briefly talk about one other pilot project that we're working on, and this is the Big Ten Open Books Project. We are collaborating between the libraries and the university presses to create a 100-book title collection from backlist titles from 6 of the university presses in the Big Ten. And we are converting those monographs into EPUB files so they're consistent. We're hosting them on Fulcrum and also doing some development on Manifold in order to make sure that the content can be reused. We're distributing them through Fulcrum, but also partnering with JSTOR and Project Muse to release the collection, to make it available within the streams. And this project we have done iteratively. We have made first a pilot group to do the planning implementation. That turned into a report and a proposal seeking funding. We secured that funding and are moving into this pilot implementation. And there's lots of recommendations within that report that we've worked on. And there's a whole team of people that were involved in really thinking deeply about how we could extend this pilot into further collections and include more presses. Think about other topic areas. Right now we're centering this collection on gender and sexuality studies, but there's many other topic areas that we're interested in exploring. And this pilot is situated within a bigger picture of an open scholarship strategy. And we move on to the next slide. Thank you, Morris. The open scholarship strategy, and I'm not going to go into this deeply because I want to leave at least a minute or two for questions, but there's 6 components to it, which goes from balancing the journal marketplace to really think about how we're doing our licensing, understanding the landscape to know how content is being used so we're making informed decisions, making sure that we are centering our work on elevating marginalized and unheard voices because we know our collections are unbalanced in their perspectives. We're working on opening the scholarly monograph and really trying to do some investment in that area to ensure that we have strengthened our own academy-owned infrastructure for publishing and for holding that content. And we're also building partnerships and investments in open resources that strengthen this whole realm of open scholarship, publishing, and content creation. And just one last slide is the current state of our open licensing. We have over the next 2 years, we will have worked on about 75% of our portfolio when you think about the dollars spent and then the agreements that we're working on for moving our content from just licensing it to moving it toward open as well. And there's a lot more work that's happening behind the scenes on that, but it's really impressive. And it's been through the peer network coming together and doing that work together. And the very last slide that I want to point out is that we are really grounding this within how we're collaborating, that we are talking with each other, we're leveraging the expertise across all our different areas of the libraries, and that the qualities of the community that we're building are really focused in those ideals that have been presented throughout this talk. Of equity and inclusion and thinking about what's just and what is sustainable for the future. So with that, thank you. I know we only have a minute or so for questions, but I just wanted to thank you for all of your time and attention.
Thank you, Morris, Kate, Lee, and Emily. If anyone has a question, please raise your hand and I can bring the mic over to you so that everyone can hear. Far back corner. I'm on my way.
Get your steps in, as we all do at this conference. Right?
Thank you.
Hi, I'm really curious. You mentioned a couple of things around, say, the metadata, the inclusive metadata. I know you've got a lot of work on, but what ways are you seeing this spread out beyond the bounds of the BTAA and really contribute to the overall transformation of how we do scholarly publishing and library collections really globally, frankly? What's kind of on your minds around that?
take that?
Sure. Well, one area that, just thinking about the ebook collection that we're publishing, so there's the Homosaurus, which is a thesaurus focused on gender and sexuality and women's studies topic areas, and we're trying to figure out how do we make sure that we add those subject headings to that collection. And we're in conversation, we're launching conversations with the catalogers, and we have a peer group of catalogers and metadata experts in order to leverage their expertise, and they are in turn, of course, connected to the broader community. So we're trying to make sure that we're connecting the pilot projects to our peer groups, and then the peer groups are connected to the broader community through ALA and various other organizations. I don't know if you have anything you want to add on that.
No, I think that's right, and that is an area where I do feel like it's part of something much bigger than the BTA, and so it's really what are we doing at the BTA level together, and then how does that filter both downward and upward? I think that's critical.
So this is, not just about metadata and stuff, but I mean, a lot of this work, some people get concerned when we talk about returnables and UBorrow and how important it is to us. That does not mean that we don't see our vision or mission as serving everybody, right? We're mostly public universities, and building this infrastructure, we see benefiting the research library, the academic community as a whole, right? And I don't see, ILL is focused on UBorrow a lot of times in our area, but we are happy to work with everybody around the world, right? Like, so I think that the stronger we are as a unit and as a consortium or an alliance, I think the better we can serve and make changes in the bigger world.
Hi, it's Karen Phillips, and you talked in the vision on this incredible project that you're doing, you talked in the vision about supporting research as well as inclusivity, and haven't specifically mentioned teaching and learning, and I just wondered what you feel the role of the BTAA is in relation to supporting student success.
So Kate mentioned peer groups, and we have a lot of those. That's what the ILL coordinators started as, and there's the peer groups around learning and teaching have really strengthened in the past couple of years. I don't think any of us are involved in those. Morris might be able to speak to some of that better. But, I mean, I think that we see this as kind of the infrastructure that helps support student success, and then the learning and teaching, not that it comes next, but that comes in collaboration with how it goes. But we've got a very strong public services, learning and teaching groups of sets of peer groups. And one of the things we're trying to do is really formalize those peer groups so that we know who to reach out to. Like, you asked that question, and I'm like, I know some of my folks at Michigan are on those groups, but I don't even know what they're called. So we're really trying to create the I hate to say bureaucracy, the infrastructure that's needed to connect the teams to make sure that we're doing what builds student success, right? So.
I think just to build on that, it might be well, just a little bit of context. The model for that 60 years of BTAA collaboration, formerly CIC, was light at the center, all of the majority of the activity in the member libraries. So what we've really been talking today is that central strategy for creating that infrastructure service at the center that all the members can depend on. And like Emily was saying, a lot of that teaching and learning, the services, the kind of services that can build on that, happens through that community network and that collaboration among the libraries. And our construction librarians, our public services groups are very strong and have been some very successful ways of sharing, through communities of practice, through other types of mechanisms. They're joining together in collectively improving and forwarding student success through teaching and learning. And that type of activity is happening on a number of fronts, building on sort of this central infrastructure, the central collaborative, the central convening power of the Big Ten Academic Alliance.
We are at time. Thank you again to our presenters, and thank you for attending this session. I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference.